Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Stephen DeFalco. I'm on the Sloan Research Papers team. It's my pleasure today to introduce Alyssa Lippman, who will be presenting how analytics changed the game for NFL club websites. The presentation will be 20 minutes long, and we will have a 5-minute Q&A session afterward. Thank you. We ask that you please hold the question that you may have until the Q&A period, and I'll be walking around the room with the microphone for the Q&A. This will not be done through Pigeonhole as it is for some other rooms. So please join me in welcoming Alyssa.
Good morning, everyone. So the 2014 NFL season just wrapped with our Super Bowl champs living right here in New England. One of the things that we wanted to talk about is the fact that data is playing a huge part in our club websites and really understanding where our game is going and what those trends are. We're seeing massive shifts in digital, mobile, and social. And that can be a challenge for some of our clubs who are limited on resources, limited on budget, and limited on staff. But we're seeing high ROI on the clubs that are investing in their digital channels. And that's something that we've really taken to heart and focused on from a data perspective to really understand why this is changing our game. So over the next couple of days here at Sloan, you're going to hear a lot about data. And a lot of from the business side we're seeing around tickets. You know how many season tickets you're selling, you know your renewal rates, you know turnstile numbers at the stadium, and you know how many jerseys you sold last year and which one of your players was most successful. But what does this mean? Big data was the big buzzword a few years ago, and that got our conversation started. So it allowed clubs to ask the question of why is data important to what we have to do within our business. But website analytics can get tricky. It's something that you want to think about from a traffic perspective, an engagement perspective, and most of our clubs knew how to pull page views, visits, unique visitors. Beyond that, it gets overwhelming. And where do you really start to dig in? And that's where we decided to come in and start working with our clubs to break through some of the challenges that they experience within all of these analytics platforms that are getting more overwhelming, deeper data, and where do you really start? So for us, it started at the league level. Our group works with the club sites group. We work with all 32 teams, helping them with their data and analytics. We also support the technology platform that all of the clubs live on for their websites. So that was really important, is to get all clubs on a singular website and be able to really focus on the areas that we could help influence. So not only from a product and technology perspective, but also from best practices and analytics perspectives to where we could take that data that we're gathering and use it to better the platform as a whole and each of our club's businesses. But it did take some time. When we first started the Club Sites project in 2008, all of our clubs were on different technologies and different analytics platforms. So what we really had to focus on was how do we get them all onto a singular analytics platform that we could really focus on and make sure we're looking at apples to apples data. Every one of these different tools has different methodologies. They measure everything slightly different, and we had to get them on to one singular instance of Adobe Analytics, or Omniture is what we're really using. By 2012, we had all 32 clubs on our platform, and all 32 clubs had access to Omniture. And that gave us incredible visibility into what they were doing and what their content plans were for their sites. But where did we begin? We had to start first with education. Educate them on the basic reports to pull, and keep it really simple. We automated dashboards so they show up in their inbox on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So it takes some of the legwork off of our strategy team, but it also gives them the tools to get used to seeing what those important points are. Then we started digging into that. We analyzed that. We looked at what all 32 clubs are doing from a platform level and also a club-by-club level. And we were able to glean some best practices, see some of the really interesting pieces of content that did well, the website layouts that did well, and we were able to use that to get results. When you have clubs that are looking towards our group for guidance, we're trying to give them things that are going to help make their website better. And that's what we are really trying to do. Give a few examples of best practices, make sure they implement that correctly on their website, and then replicate. And that's the great thing about what we get to do from our perspective, is that we have 32 clubs who are not necessarily competitors to each other on digital. They have the same content calendars, the same calendars of events, and very similar club objectives. And so when you have a successful concept, they can just replicate that, and one club is constantly copying the other club. And we love to see it. We encourage it. So how do we use this data? We don't just send out reports without context. We're looking at how does this drive your website layouts, what landing pages, what your homepage looks like. We want to make sure that we're understanding our fans, starting to segment our fans into different areas and really understand the different traffic patterns that occur. And we're looking very heavily on content, always looking to test and refine that and make sure that all clubs have the right content mix on their site. And all of that goes back to just optimizing resources, making sure you have the right staff in place to get what you need to get done on your sites. We work primarily with the club digital teams, but a lot of our successes have come from our top-down approach. We've been working with club executives and ownership to educate them on the future of digital, where all of our shifts are happening, the trends that are occurring, and to really get them to focus that this is an area that you do need to invest in. This is the future, and these are where our fans are. When you think from an ownership level, a lot of focus is spent on the 70,000 fans that come to your stadium every Sunday. But what about the 7 million average monthly unique visitors that a club site might have? What are you doing to engage them 365 days a year? It's an important question, and some things that they may know all of these data points in stadium, but they don't always know the data points within their website and their digital realm. So we wanted to find a way to start communicating that effectively. One of the ways that we've been able to do that was getting competitive off the field. The way that we started to get attention was by showing rankings and showing from 1 through 32 where each of their clubs rank. And when you show an owner and they see that they're either number 1 or number 32, it does start to get attention. So we wanted to focus on a couple different areas. Most of the time, executives are used to seeing traffic patterns. They're used to seeing their clubs ranked in ComScore from 1 through 32. Who has the most unique visitors? That's what they're used to seeing. But the top 5 clubs in traffic don't normally change too much. Part of that is because it's very much influenced by a few different factors that are completely outside of a digital department's control. Win-loss record, they can't control what happens on the field, their market size, and their club history. And those are really important things to understand, that you can't control that if you are a digital director or a writer or a video producer. You can't control those 3 things. Those are built into the nature of your club. But what you can control is engagement. You can control how much time someone spends on your website. You can get them to return more often with really strong, engaging content. You can get them to go 2 more pages deeper than they normally would. Those are things that you can do with website layout, with the quality of your content, and also by segmenting your users and starting to look at what does a social user do? What is your loyal visitors doing on your site? Those are all important things that we look at and we start to stress because it normalizes our 32 clubs in a different way that we're used to seeing. So small market teams are now rising to the top, and we're looking at different ways that we can see what they're doing best that we wouldn't have normally looked at if we only looked at traffic metrics. Now, a lot of us see Excel spreadsheets day in and day out. This is the way that we report numbers. This is the way that we start to analyze the data that comes through. But from an ownership perspective, this isn't necessarily the best way to communicate something. An Excel spreadsheet that's attached in an email isn't necessarily read. And even if it is opened, do they even understand what all of these metrics mean? So it's important to add context. It's important to add a story behind that. And that's where our digital scorecard project was born. This is something that we started 3 years ago, so we're on our 3rd season of the digital scorecard. It's something that we focus on as a way to give context to the data, to tell a story, and to make it an engaging way to look at digital data. But we wanted to get this in front of owners, so what did we need to focus on? We wanted to make it really visual. We wanted to have strong creative elements. We needed to make it very easy to understand and digest, and we printed it. So this is something that maybe goes against digital, but we printed a book that if you ask any digital director, they have this sitting on their desk. They don't throw it away, it doesn't get filed, and it's a constant reference for them that they get every single year. So here is just high-level summary of all of the data points that we include within our digital scorecard. We do 2 versions of it. There's an executive summary that's only 10 pages long that goes to team presidents, ownership, CFOs, anyone that's really in charge of the business. That's something that walks through all the high-level KPIs. They get a quartile evaluation of how their club performed, and they also get to see a brief strengths and opportunities analysis that's written in written format to give them some context around what these numbers really mean to their club specifically. And then the full scorecard goes to each of the digital teams. They get full rankings in website traffic and engagement, social media, monetization of their digital platforms. This is important to just give them a full breadth of all of the data points that we collect in one succinct book that they get on an annual basis. Now we look at a variety of data points within each of these metrics. We're looking at different time periods. So we look at a modified calendar year that excludes January and February because it skews our clubs for playoffs. So if you're not in playoffs, your numbers are going to be lower, and if you are, they skyrocket to the top. So we take out January and February from that calendar year. And then we look at off-season and regular season. We give platform averages for every one of our metrics, so you can see, are you above or below that average? We're giving year over year specific to the club and also specific to the platform. And then we give rankings. So this is something that is very important because this is where the competitive aspect really comes into play. It's important for these clubs to see their rankings. It's important for them to understand where they rank, especially when you're maybe used to being on the top and you might show up a little bit closer to the bottom in some of these areas. There's not a single club that is number 1 in every single category. Every club has an area to improve, and every club has a strength. Now we're going to go through a few of these slides and just to show some of the visuals that we're looking at. Again, these are very simple, they're easy to understand, and they're highly engaging. It makes you want to continue reading what all of these numbers mean. Here's another one of page views and consumption. So this is important because we talked a little bit about traffic and engagement. And traffic numbers are going to be skewed again by your win-loss, your market size, your team history. And so what we try to do is relate it to the engagement metric that's important. So page views are related to consumption. So page views per visit is the metric that we use for that. The average number of pages viewed on a visit. Now, we do the same with visits. We look at time on site. That's the engagement metric tied to that because it's the average time spent on a visit. And then unique visitors, we look at retention and how often does a unique visitor return to your website. And one of the things we focused on in the graphics is to make it relevant. So we tried to create graphics that were very specific to what we live and breathe every day in the NFL. Rich content is an area that we focus pretty heavily on. We really strive to make our clubs have the best content out there to give their fans what they're looking for at any time of the year. And so we do spend a lot of time on videos, photos, articles, making sure that content is what your fan base is looking for and what they want. So what we start to look at is rich content, is what we call that content that's changing on a daily basis, and then static content becomes everything else. And we like to look at that mix. What percentage of your page views are going towards videos, photos, and article content? Now, this is one area that we really like to put out there as often as we can, is the top quartile clubs. Looking at who does it best. That's a question that we constantly get from our clubs is, who should I look at as best in class? And the thing is, there isn't one club that's best in class, and that's what's important to note. If you look at just our traffic metrics, you'll see the Cowboys, the Packers, the Seahawks, and the Niners show up in all 4 traffic metrics for Quartile 1 within their content. It doesn't mean they show up in Quartile 1 for engagement. And instead, we get to recognize teams like the Rams, who are Quartile 1 in video engagement. We've got the Bills, Quartile 1 in written content. We've got the Bucks and the Titans showing up in Quartile 1 for photos. These are things that we wouldn't have ever seen before and not looked at deeply if we only relied on traffic metrics. And that's what's important, is we really have to dig into these data points to get the story that we want and to be able to pull out case studies and different pieces of content that trend well and pull those out and deliver that to our clubs. Another area that we're really starting to see a lot of shifts in is our referral sources. So search engines, external websites, and also social. So social is really changing our entire digital business. We're seeing so much more traffic driven from Facebook and Twitter, and we have to start digging into that. So this portion of the scorecard has changed dramatically over the last 3 years. It's an area that used to be about 2 pages, and now I think we have 6 to 7 pages of just social content. So when we look at that, we're looking at Facebook engagement rates, we're looking at Twitter engagement rates, we're looking across all of the platforms that clubs are participating on. And then we start to break it down, because a Facebook referral and someone that comes from those platforms takes completely different actions on a club website than a Twitter referred visitor. So it's important for us to look at that, to understand the impact that that is having on your website, and to start cater specific areas, whether that's UI or the specific content that appeals more to a socially referred visitor. Another area that we've started expanding into is just visuals, looking at visuals as a way to display all of our data points. So scatter plots have been a great way for us to expose our 1 through 32 clubs without literally having to list them within an Excel spreadsheet. So it's important for us to see this type of view, because clubs are able to benchmark where they land, who's above them, who's below them, and how far is it going to take them to get to number 1. Because that's pretty much the most common question we get, is how can I be number 1 in every single category? And that probably won't necessarily happen for any club, but they like to strive to get there. And that should be everyone's goal. Is it going to take a 20% increase or a 200% increase? Those are all important ways that if you show it in a visual way, it means a lot more than just being placed into Excel. Now, this is the page that a lot of clubs get their scorecard and they're sifting through to find this page. This is their quartile evaluation. This is something that they look at as a quick glance of every metric and where they're strong. So if you are in quartile 1 and 2, you are above the average. If you are in 3 or 4, you are below the average. So you can see here within this quartile evaluation, that's a sample from one of our clubs from last year, that this club is very strong in traffic. So they're probably in a large market, they probably had a great season on the field, but what you can see is some interesting things in engagement. You can see that they're actually below the average in video engagement. They're below the average in photo engagement. So here's where, if we only looked at traffic, we wouldn't see these things. If we look at engagement, we now have an action plan put in place for this club to focus on video and photos, and where they're strongest is articles, and now we have a way to say, your strong point is articles, focus on getting more video and photo content to drive to those areas as well. Now here's a different example. Now we've got a team in a smaller market, lower traffic, quartile 4 in traffic. Now they're probably used to seeing themselves in quartile 4 in every report that they see. But in engagement, they've got some interesting strengths in here. They're number 1, quartile 1 in video engagement and quartile 2 in time on site. That means they have some really strong video content. And that's an area that we would take this club and say, what are they doing differently? We may not have looked at them before. Let's dig into the content that they have and figure out how we can make that work for other clubs. But we don't just send out a report and just let the clubs take action. We work hand in hand with them. We're giving them a brief strengths and opportunities analysis that brings out some of the areas that they can work on for the coming year. And then we have a team of account managers who are dedicated to each one of our 32 clubs to work with them to implement these changes, to work with them on best practices. And these account managers put action plans in place that they're able to track all of the results of the clubs that implement any recommendations that we put out there. So it's really important to us to really track and measure from start to finish any one of our examples that get put into place, because we're able to pass it to the other 31 clubs and hope that they're able to replicate the same results. So our digital scorecard has really become a conversation starter. It's been a way that we can look at data in a different way, to dissect it and look at it in a lot of different areas, not only just from the website traffic, which is what we focused on today, but we're also looking at sponsorship opportunities, ad click-throughs, sales of subscription products, and we're looking at different ways that we can take all of this data, make it actionable, and make it meaningful. So one of the things that I would just stress to all of you is think about all of the data and the research that you do today within your jobs. Think about how you can take some of these areas and make them visual, make them graphic, make them meaningful, and tell a story. Because that's what we've really found, is to create context, to start bringing the data and taking action on it. And the other piece of it is get your data in the right hands, because we want all of our clubs, we want all of our businesses to make decisions rooted in data. So that's something that I just really stress that to all of us, and I stress to my team and everyone that we work with, is create visual representations of your data, and it will mean so much more to the people that read it. So that wraps up my presentation. We have time for a couple questions, and then I'll also have our scorecard on display if anyone wants to look at it after the break, after the next session. So any questions? Yes. Oh, actually, sorry. Here. Go ahead.
So I was wondering, obviously, for the NFL and all the leagues, the network contracts are a huge primary source of revenue. How do you think they could use the data that you're getting in terms of engagement, community size, as a way to either fight for or for the networks to fight against those the revenue increases on the next TV contract?
Well, we don't work too much on the TV side of things, but we are constantly using this data to be able to provide to our team so they can take it to their broadcast partners, so they can take it to their sponsors. They can say, look at the value of the digital platforms that we're creating. Look at the millions of fans that we have on our social networks. How can you use that to drive broadcast? How can you use that to work as a partner instead of a competitor? Because so much of what we're seeing is towards second screen. You're using your website as a way to enhance the viewing of the game.
Great presentation, very insightful. I have a two-part question. One, is it a challenge that you're printing out the digital scorecard and therefore the learnings probably take a year in order to make, to adapt and for these teams to get better, I guess, from a strategy standpoint? And the second one, are a lot of teams still using point solutions for content creation and publishing into websites or through the social channels? Or is that all streamlined, like with Omniture?
Point solutions? What do you mean by that?
Just kind of cobbled, as you mentioned there, like Google Analytics. Like in 2008, a bunch of teams were using different technologies, and I wonder if that's the case for content creation or CMS or publishing to social.
So all of our clubs are on the same CMS, and they're using that as their way to publish all of their content across their platforms. So we have the benefit of having them all doing the same publishing workflow, and because of that, we're able to control the analytics that go into that. So all of that is seamless, and they don't have to worry about implementation of analytics. All of that is on our team. The second part is around the printing of the scorecard. So we try to get these out as soon as possible at the end of the season. So my digital analyst is sitting here, and he is working on it this weekend and trying to get it finished up for our 2014 results. That's something that we've worked on to get it out sooner and sooner at the end of each year. This will be the soonest that we've gotten it out in any of the 3 years that we've produced it. But it is something that we try to create the turnaround because If we produce it really late, which last season was a little bit later than we had hoped, it does take away from the time that they can implement. But the great thing about digital is you can take a recommendation and implement it today. And that's the benefit of being on digital, is you don't need to wait for something to be printed. You don't need to wait for a report. You can just start implementing right away.
So we have time for one more quick question if anyone has one.
You measured, everyone's trying to figure out social. You measured size of community on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and engagement on Facebook and Twitter as far as the quartiles went. How do you quantify engagement and beyond that, work out the quality of that engagement? Tough question.
Yeah,
sorry.
no. It's actually a question we ask ourselves every single day is this the right way to measure social? So we work with Twitter and Facebook and the platforms to figure out the best way to measure social media. We've been using the typical engagement of likes, comments, shares divided by your community size. That's our engagement rate right now. And then this on Twitter, it's retweets and retweets and favorites divided by community size. So, and then we are constantly asking, should we be measuring it this way? How do we start to incorporate clicks as the algorithm changes to drive traffic? We would love to be able to start shifting our metrics, and we do. We try not to just change up our metrics all the time, but we are looking at very small ways that we can try to incorporate different ways to measure social to make it more relevant. You know, the other day we were just talking, do you weight a comment or a share heavier than a like? What are the different ways that you can start slicing and dicing the data? But it's a constant challenge.
Thank you all very much, and thank you very much, Alyssa.
Thank you, guys.